I'm looking forward to sharing a powerful podcast with you with my guest, Kim Haas. Kim Haas is creator and host of Afro-Latino Travels with Kim Haas. Check out her bio and links to her program and website, Creativity and Compassion, on my website, fluencyconsulting. Kim spent 10 years in search of support for accurate representation of African heritage populations in the countries and regions of the languages with which she fell in love, Spanish and Portuguese preeminent among them. Her kindness and humility led to an awareness of the invisible lives and roles of Afro-Latinos who have literally been overlooked, literally uncounted, and invisible through so many years in the Spanish-speaking world. Kim is dedicated to making the invisible visible, celebrating lives. She talks about how she made a choice to connect with the world as it is, and then to celebrate it, and to make it visible, and then to invite you in so that you can see, you can appreciate, and you in turn can choose connection to the world. What will be your travel? What will be your journey? Enjoy this podcast with Kim Haas as she takes us on her journey, her discoveries. Hi, I'm Norah Jones. Welcome to It's About Language. So, what is language all about? Well, it's about learning and sharing, opening doors in education, work, and life. Language is about creating communities and creating boundaries. It's all about the mystery of what makes us human. So, our conversations will explore that mystery and the impact of what makes us human. It's about language in life. It's about language at work. It's about language for fun. Welcome to the podcast. Boy, is it a pleasure for me to welcome Kim Haas today to the podcast. Kim, welcome.
Thank you so much, Norah. Great to be here. Thank you.
I just had a joy in meeting you and spending a little time talking with you when we were at the Northeast Conference for the Teaching of Foreign Languages there in New York City. And you had just been also to the Bilingual Education Conference. And in both of them, you provided a keynote. And I'm always fascinated. Can you talk about what your keynote was about? But connected also to why it is that for those particular audiences, you would have chosen the keynote you did. What were you sharing?
Oh, thank you, Norah. And it was just, I loved meeting with you. So thank you again. And yeah, the keynote for both conferences really focused on the importance of either learning a language, maintaining your heritage language, and I think how absolutely important it is and that we not lose sight of it. So that's kind of the summary for me. And then giving examples, like I told a story of listening to the radio here in New York, and a woman said that she had a master's degree in a useless language from NYU. And I was astounded, and I was like, oh my gosh. And then when she said that her master's was in French, my heart just broke. And I thought about all the people who may be listening in that moment and hearing her describe her major as useless. And I just thought, she can be impacting someone in that very moment. And someone may be on the edge of thinking about to major in French or any language. And how, to me, language, in this case, it's only useless if you believe it's useless. Because it starts right in, with your mind. And if you believe it's useless, well, then it will be. And I said in the speeches, but how can French, I'm using that as an example, but how can French be useless if 70 million people speak French as a first language? It can't be useless. We have, mothers raising their children in French, and doctors and nurses caring for patients in French, engineers designing, infrastructure projects, bakers baking pastries and all those good things. And I'm not talking about just in France, but in, throughout the Francophile world. And then you have another 200 and I think 30 million people who speak French as a second and third language. It just can't be useless. But I just feel like she didn't think big enough about it. She didn't think without limitations about all the wonderful things that she could do with it. Maybe she had some new way of creating something that we haven't even enjoyed yet or hasn't shared with the world yet. But it starts with your thinking. And so I use that as an example for both conferences, really trying to inspire, I hope, people, to learn, whether to learn another language or really see the absolute benefits of it. That's what was my goal.
Well, and it certainly had that impact in the conference that I was at with your keynote. It was powerful. And what is it in your personal history, Kim, that has led you to understand that, well, languages are not useless? Where do you come from to make that insight happen?
Nora, I love your questions. And I think, I think as someone who started, I tell the story that a stranger taught me, my first experiences with a world language, another language, not English, was when I traveled to Mexico, and a stranger taught me to count in Spanish from 1 to 20. And that experience did everything for me. And I say that it changed my DNA, if that's even possible. But it changed the course of my life. And I think about all these wonderful people that I've met with in my travels and that I was able to communicate with because I spoke, whether it's Spanish, I also speak Portuguese and Italian, who perhaps didn't speak English or maybe didn't feel as comfortable speaking English. But because I could speak to them in Spanish, Portuguese, or Italian, this whole world opens up when you take the time to learn another language, whether it's learning just a few words because you're preparing for a trip or really, majoring it as I did. But so I think the experiences have just been innumerable and priceless because I'm able to connect with people that otherwise I would not be. And it's just absolutely amazing. I love it.
And the thing is, you went from counting from 1 to 20 with a perfect stranger there as a kiddo visiting Mexico, to speaking fluent Spanish, Italian, and Portuguese, majoring in Spanish for both your undergraduate and graduate degree. So what lit that fire that you would have continued to collect languages and use languages? Talk some about the motivation behind your dedication then in this direction.
Yeah, I think I was just after studying Spanish in middle school, high school, majoring it as you said in college, undergraduate, and I knew I wanted to travel to Spain, and I lived with a Spanish family in Seville in southern Spain, and I say that they treated me like I was the fifth Pantoja child, and I just it's this whole other world. And, when you're able to communicate, because they didn't speak English, not that they had to, because I was in their country, right? I'm a guest. And so it really forced me to really practice and learn Spanish for that year. And it was just an amazing experience. So I think that was part of the motivation is once, you're there and I wanted to communicate with them. I wanted to speak fluently. I'd marvel at them and how they use certain words and try and just soak it all in. And plus, I was going out at night, I must say, because the Spanish do know how to party, Nora. And, you want to, so you want to, be able to communicate, so it was really a lot of fun. And I think then I came back to finish my last year in college at the University of Pittsburgh. And so I had Spanish, and Pitt just has just every language under the sun was taught at the Cathedral of Learning, and it was just amazing. You could learn almost pretty much it felt like any language. So I decided, call me crazy, but I decided to study Portuguese, Italian, and continuous Spanish, like one of my semesters, and that's just like, what is she thinking? It's just studying like 3 Romance languages at the same time, the same semester, but it was wonderful, and I just felt so alive, and I just love it. You have to really focus in. You have to think, okay, what class am I in? What language is this? But it was great. And that was, I think the motivation really is my desire to speak fluently with people of other, cultures and backgrounds, to be able to connect with people and to joke with someone or to share a laugh or a smile, or a tear, but to really connect with them. And I think being able to speak another language allows you to do that.
That true humanity that you were just talking about connecting with. I'm actually going to take you on that little bit of that side trip now, Kim, to identity, how this became part of your identity. From other podcasts, my listeners may be aware that I not only ask about identity, but I also recognize that for some that are not as familiar with perhaps learning languages and coming across cultures, that they sometimes fear that those around them, say their children, will lose their identity. And often we in the language community recognize that identity can be additive.
Yes.
It's a bit of a long introduction to ask you this, but the importance of identity with regard to your work is critical. If you could talk to us about that.
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, you made some really great points. And I think, as you said, I mean, it's all, so much of it is about how we perceive things. And if you see it as an opportunity and not to, of learning a language or maintaining whatever your heritage language is, do not give that up. But that can be your identity, as you said, can be continuously, we can add onto it in terms of identity. And it's not something that you have to limit yourself to. But I, encourage people to, learn what part of their heritage, it's part of your culture. And then you can still, whether it's learning, the language spoken in wherever you may now be residing. But I don't think it's not an either or. I see it as, learn another language, learn as many as you like. I mean, do not limit yourself, but to open yourself up to more possibilities. And so your identity to me can be constantly evolving.
What kind of role of identity for you personally did languages evoke? When you were taking languages, one of the things that you mentioned to us in your keynote was something that you noticed with regard to who was speaking the languages, who people thought were speaking the languages, and your own experience as a Black woman in the United States speaking Spanish. Can you tell the listeners some of the experiences you had and what kind of conclusions and directions you went in, both that which you've already talked about that I have heard, but also more in depth as you desire?
Yeah, sure. And I think the question of identity is because I majored in Spanish, undergraduate, graduate school. I worked for Telemundo, the Spanish language television network, for a while in Philadelphia. And so in terms of, and so most times on Spanish language television, you see people of European descent on, as the anchors in almost all the programming. I mean, close to 100%. And when I traveled throughout Latin America, and then I returned at that time to Philadelphia where I was raised, I started meeting more people of African descent. And so this whole interest in Afro-Latino culture it was so fascinating to me because I was traveling to countries like Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, Venezuela, and I'm starting to see all these people who look like me, who could be my, as I say, my uncle, my aunt, my grandmother, mi abuela, mi abuelo. And then I turn on television and there's no one. I mean, there's no one of African descent. And I'm thinking, wow, we are missing out on all these incredible people that I'm meeting. I'm meeting Puerto Rican writers and dancers and cooks, and I'm learning so much. I mean, so much of Latin America and what we enjoy was started by Afro-Latinos, so people of African descent. But yet they're not represented pretty much at all in media. And what a shame that is for all of us, because we all lose out when we don't learn about the gifts, the talents, the history of anyone, but in particular, I'm thinking about in my focus, which is of Afro-Latino. So samba in Brazil. I mean, samba, hands down, is Brazil's national dance music genres. It was created by Afro-Brazilians. And, but yet there are times in Brazilian history where Afro-Brazilians weren't allowed to participate in something that they created. And so,
Wow.
yeah, or in Costa Rica, blacks built the Costa Rican Railroad. Those from Jamaica and other Caribbean islands. And in Panama, the canal was built by Afro-Panamanians and then also Caribbean islanders. And so this is crucial. This is so important. And so the more I learned about it, and I'm still learning, I just feel like this is an incredible journey. But the more I learn about it and want to share it, and so that people also, particularly people of African descent in Latin America, hopefully feel good about themselves, because there's a lot of, when you don't see yourself and when you don't see anyone who looks like you get all kinds of feelings. I'm not important. I'm not worthy. I haven't done anything. And so seeing people who look like you, learning about your history, I think you do start to stand up taller and straighter and have pride in knowing that your ancestors, in so many cases form the very foundation of so many of these countries. And so that's what I've been on this journey quest to really tell the stories of so many of these people that I'm meeting, which we are not seeing on Spanish language television still. And
Wow.
yeah, and there are estimates, conservative, that 1 in 3 Latin Americans are of African ancestry, have African ancestry. So 1 in 3, and then yet you watch Spanish language television and pretty much almost zero.
Isn't that interesting? I'm still channeling the emotion, not only that you're expressing, but also in my classes. I taught both Spanish and French, and I remember being sensitized to the lack of representation fairly early on, thank goodness, in my career, and making sure that from the first year onward that there was plenty of searching for videos and things that would represent students of all kinds of continental backgrounds,
Mm-hmm.
so that they recognize the language universality from among all ethnicities and heritages. Now, Kim, you turned that awareness and that shock into a PBS program, your Afro-Latino Travels with Kim Haas. Talk to us, please. And it's interesting, you established that pretty much the same time, the same month and same year that I established my podcast. So I'm especially fascinated by that. Can you talk then about your Afro-Latino Travels and your PBS program, please?
Sure, no, thank you. And it's I created the show, at least the idea. I had the idea, at least, the light bulb went off at least 10 years ago. And it's taken, pretty much that long to try and get it on the air, going from idea to actually where you have a television show that you can air was just an incredibly challenging experience, because 10 years ago we were not speaking about Afro-Latinos as we are now. And so when I would pitch, because we needed support in order to produce the show, so when I would pitch a corporation or a foundation about it, hey, I have this idea to really celebrate and honor all the accomplishments. I mean, it's a good thing of, people in Latin America, black people. It just went nowhere. I mean, it
Wow.
went, yeah, there was no interest whatsoever. I couldn't get any support until finally someone just said, you know what, you're going to have to pay for it yourself, make the investment, because it's just not happening. And so finally, we were able to shoot in Costa Rica, and I thank them, the tourism board, because they believed in it. And and also I think what's interesting is because Costa Rica is not one of those countries that automatically comes to mind when you think about blacks in Latin America. Usually people think about Brazil and Cuba the Dominican Republic or Puerto Rico, but not Costa Rica. But Costa Rica has a significant history of blacks and people of African descent. And so they were on board, and we were able to shoot the first 2 episodes in San Jose, the capital, and then in Limon on the coast. And I just wanted to show the incredible brilliance and creativity and warmth and tenacity and resilience of all these people who we just don't see. I mean, you think about it, it's absolutely incredible that we leave out at least a third of the Latin American population.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. This podcast is specifically designed to grow the communities of those who know that language and cultural understanding are critical for the future of education, business, and connections. If you'd like to donate, sponsor, or subscribe, please go to my website, fluency.consulting. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much for your support. And why would you say, what were some of the conversations that you had with the folks in Costa Rica, the tourism board and so forth, that made them decide that this was indeed something they wanted to support you in, that provided these opportunities for you to do these wonderful recordings? The episodes are phenomenal, by the way. Just enjoyed them thoroughly. Why were they the breakthrough, do you think? What were some of the aspects?
I worked directly with the PR agency that had the contract with the tourism board. And, it's nothing like having a champion and someone who believes in your project. And Norah, you may have, gone through but these champions who just say they believe in it. And so with the PR agency, we just had a real champion in the project. And she said, we are going to bat for this. So I didn't talk to the tourism board directly. We went through the PR agency, and they said, we believe in this. We believe in the importance of it. And I, thanked them. And they said, we haven't seen anything like this, and it's important to tell this story. And so then they pitched it to their client, who was a tourism board. And then somebody just said, you know what? She has worked on this long enough, hard enough, given her heart and soul. Give her this opportunity. That's what I think. Somebody upstairs was like, goodness, she has tried for the last, 10 years almost. Let's give her this. And we were off and running.
Finally, somebody had your back with that and helped you to have that breakthrough.
Yes.
Since that breakthrough, have others that initially did not respond positively to your work or to your pitch recognize the power of what you're doing?
Yeah, that's great. Since Costa Rica, well, now it's like we have episodes that we can share. Before, it's just an idea. I don't mean just, but it's an idea. And so it's hard for people to visualize. You can tell them all you want. But, just like having a podcast, until somebody can listen to, one of your episodes, it's still just in someone's head, in their imagination of what it could be or what it does sound like. So finally, after we shot in Costa Rica, we were able to edit. We've been sharing them with some of those same countries that I pitched years ago. But I think because of George Floyd and, bless his soul and that of his families, so much has changed since then. So I think we've been, I'm going to say the recipients of interest as this been, globally has hit the world in terms of what was happening and how he was, killed. And so I think we've seen that, yes, many of the countries that we had pitched previously are now have a greater interest. But I think it's also not just George Floyd, but also in Latin America, there's been an increased interest in Latino, pan-Latino issues, whatever country. So in Mexico or in Colombia. So there's this movement now where you see more politicians, like in our San Jose episode, we interview the sisters of Epsie Campbell. Epsie Campbell is the first vice president of a Latin American country of African descent. And so, it's those kinds of things. So now the politics in Brazil, we're seeing more Afro Brazilians running for office, and so in Colombia, I mean, there's changes happening. I think much of it, yes, sparked by George Floyd, but also just internally within. And so people of African descent in Latin America are asserting themselves. You'll see that even more. Afro Mexicans are finally have been counted in the Mexican census. I mean, this is the first time at nearly 500 years of people of African descent being in Mexico, and they were never counted. And if you're not counted, that means a loss. There's so much you don't receive as a citizen, as a human being, resources, and you're not seen, you're invisible. So Afro Mexicans finally, I think it was a 2020 recent census within the last like 2 years, have finally been counted in Mexico. I know.
Wow, Kim.
After we pick ourselves up off the floor.
I keep saying wow because you just reveal so many things. It's not very erudite, but it sure is fascinating.
Yeah.
And appalling in some
Yes,
directions. So
absolutely.
you are working right now with your major and the background that you've started out with the Spanish speaking cultures, in the case of Brazil, with the Brazilian Portuguese cultures. You started this conversation by noting that there was this strange comment about French being a useless language. There are so many folks around the world that are of African heritage or living in countries in Africa that are French speaking by national design.
Yes.
What kind of work, if any, or what other conversations have you had that help to expand this identity across additional languages from the Spanish that you're using with the Afro-Latino?
So, I mean, so if it's not Spanish, because that was my major, but Portuguese, studying that because I just find Afro-Brazilian culture in particular, but you also have Cabo Verde off the coast of Africa, Mozambique and Angola, where people of African descent speak Portuguese in addition to, their other languages. And so I just always found it just so fascinating seeing people who look like me and in other parts of the world. And I think about Brazil because I was just there just a couple months ago, and learning about their history and what do we have in common, what are some differences, how does it express themselves. And I just find it really interesting. And then in Italy right now, I mean, they're kind of, I don't know if to say struggling, but they're dealing with this whole immigration issue and having people come in from other parts of, in particular, Africa, and not always, not every Italian, but not always so well received. But being able to, express myself in Italian. I'll tell you this, when I'm in Italy, it's funny because sometimes people don't expect you to speak Italian. So I've heard people say things and I just sit there and listen, and they're talking about me, sometimes good, sometimes not so, And so it's funny when you can like surprise them, and you should see their faces, Nora, when they, learn that you speak Italian. I mean, it is just priceless that, and so learning about kind of sometimes the Afro, if you say Italian experience, is really interesting. And, it's seeing countries like Italy, for example, that's, white, European, having to deal with, this influx, of people who are not of Italian descent. And, change is hard. I mean, this is what it comes down to. Changing the way you see yourselves, the way you see your culture. Language is always evolving. As people come in, they influence language and the words and vocabulary. And so change is hard, and having to deal with change is tough for human beings.
Culturally, linguistically, ethnically, these changes all are part of how we see ourselves,
Yes.
indeed. You've had so many wonderful interviews, I know. as part of just the way you live, but also as part of your travels series. Can you pick out an especially amazing, touching, important story or two to share with the listeners today?
Oh my gosh. You know what? When you're asking that question, and there's so many people, but one that comes to mind is Antonio, and he's not in the show. He's in Rio, Copacabana, one of the hotels where I was staying 2 or 3 years ago when I was in Rio. And he looked like he could have been my, brother or cousin. He's a dark skinned, man, Afro Brazilian. And again, this is right when you can speak a language. And so we were able to speak in Portuguese. He didn't speak English. And he was the bellman there. And when I do presentations, I title my slide about him. There's a picture of the two of us together, A Gentleman in Rio, because I want people to see him as a gentleman. And I'm almost getting emotional when I think about him and how absolutely kind and giving I'll say what is, and he told me how hard it is for him in Rio. He said when I cross the street, people grab their bags, they walk, and he said how challenging it was. And I just loved him. And I just had a wonderful time. We just connected. And I think about what talents and gifts he has to offer the world that he may never, and I don't even want to put this out there, but because of, we'll just say it, racism, will he have a chance to be all that he can be? He could, who knows what he can be, but because of it's racism, will Antonio, be able to express himself fully with all his talents and gifts? Because he has them, and we all do. And so I feel like I'm on the verge of crying just because I just love seeing him, every day, and we would speak and, have a chance to talk to him. And he talked about how often he's so negatively treated by people and people at the hotel and guests. And so when I try and honor him in my presentations with that slide, because I do want us to think about him as a true gentleman that he is and how kind he is, and wishing for him just the absolute best. So I think about him when you ask that question. He was the first person.
I so deeply appreciate that story, especially because it clearly did touch deeply your heart and spirit. And thank you for sharing that vulnerable moment. When you look then at the production of the show and you think you have Antonio in the back of your mind, and you see the racism that creates the blockages for him, what are some of the ways, Kim, that through that show and through your presentations that you see the possibility to open doors for Antonio and so many like him?
Nora, I love your questions. And I just hope that, through the show, and we, looking to shoot in Brazil one day, and I just hope that as a result of the show, people will think differently. Well, first of all, people, write me and tell me when they see the show, oh, I didn't know that there were blacks in Costa Rica. So the first thing is awareness, that hopefully the show is just bringing awareness to, in this instance, Costa Rica, but whatever the country, that there are people of African descent living their lives, that they have a history it's pretty tremendous in each country. And that's the first thing, is just awareness. Because so many people say, I had no idea. So then,
I had no idea.
Yes. And so that brings me great joy to know that hopefully we're opening people's hearts and minds to learning about other cultures and other people in these countries. And then hopefully that maybe they'll read more, they'll travel to some of these places. They'll be interested in, reading about Quince Duncan, one of the authors that we interviewed in the segment, or going to Selvin's restaurant on the Limon Coast, or taking a dance class, with the Achira, any of those things. but also thinking about the humanity of these people and the people, and really saying, oh, well, they have the same wants and desires as I do. And to see, they may not see Antonio on camera, but what these people for me represent is this incredible talent that's there. And I hope that, they'll think about Latin America differently, that they'll think about Costa Rica differently specifically, or whatever country, and they'll be inspired to learn more and support, as I said, through reading some of the books of authors, going, if they travel, going to some of these places, and doing whatever comes to mind that is a positive force. And that maybe somebody like Antonio, that hopefully, they'll think about him in a different way if they happen to be in Rio, and extend a kindness, kind word, because knowing that he's a human being, and he has wants and desires just like everyone else. And unfortunately, just because of the color of his skin, and the place where he grows up on, it's just very challenging.
Well, and that opening our eyes to the Antonios in front of us, no matter where we go, including down the street, may we indeed have that happen, because all of the openings that are possible. Kim, turn that mirror for just a second on to the United States. What are some of the insights, concerns, if however you would like to put it? You're a very positive person. You come at everything that you do with such an attitude of freedom and joy and invitation that it's very compelling and inviting. So turn to just for a moment to the United States. We have very few people relative to many countries that take languages, that understand why they should. Turn your good eye to the United States now. What are some of the things that you can imagine happening that can help to turn the tide in the United States to the importance of languages and cultures?
Wow. I mean, I think so often, we're kind of a celebrity-led, or at least inspired country, and it's a great question. I think seeing more people, who are, because I think seeing more people who are in positions or prominent positions who speak another language would be so helpful. I mean, I don't think if I'm not mistaken, no matter how people feel politically, I don't think any of the presidents have ever spoken another language. I mean, I could be wrong, but so, I mean, that's seeing people in certain positions who if they were bilingual, spoke another language, or had that inclination, I think they're an example. Or, I hate to, say it, but I think celebrities have a certain, just because of their platform. And if there were people that are kind of prominent who spoke other languages, it probably, I think, would inspire people to do so. But we don't have to wait for any of that. I mean, and I don't think we should. It's just saying that if someone that we saw in the public eye, put it that way, and we saw them speaking in another language, I think that could inspire people for sure. And so I think that would be key. But I think the more, hopefully, and we're kind of hopefully moving out of the pandemic, or at least traveling again, I always try and encourage people to, when you're going to a different country, and I try and do that, even learn just a few words. Learn how to say thank you and hello, and whatever language you're speaking. So there are things that we can do where we're not waiting for, again, someone else, to lead by example. But if we can all see the value in it, and again, it's not about people, you don't have to major in a language, but learning some basic phrases and caring about it. And people pick up on that when you are trying. I mean, you don't have to be, it's not about being fluent. I'm not fluent in French, but by no means, I just know a couple words, but I try. When I'm there, I try to be gracious. So I think those things are all things that we can do to make a difference. And I think those kinds of things are important. And I think schools, right where we are, the schools can really stress the importance of learning a language, and to live in this global society. I mean, look, after coronavirus, if people don't know that we're all connected, that something can start in one region of the world and truly within, however long you want to say, days, whatever, can be, somewhere else in another corner of the world, we are. And so by learning another language, it's a great way to connect with people.
You have helped people, especially those of African heritage, to discover the background, very touched by the stories of certainly the percentage of the population, again, the construction of canals and railroads and the bringing of culture. And it sounds to me, Kim, like there's so much of a richness there still, even in the United States, for encouraging all to take languages, to connect up with the excitement that's around the world, to connect and honor people and make things happen. But do you see a special positive impact in the young people or grown-ups of African heritage in the United States with regard to languages? What kinds of encouragements or insights do you have?
Well, I think what we've been seeing, since the show launched, is people have said to me, and people who said, they're African American in particular, and they said, oh, because of the show, watching an episode, now I want to get back and study Spanish. And yeah, so I received, correspondence many times with people saying, oh, I really want to now study Spanish, or I'm going to dust off my, or I'm going to get back to it. And so that's been really wonderful if we can inspire people, and I think particularly people of African descent, to want to study another language, whatever it may be, then that's really wonderful. And I think it just, so much of it just depends on, I think, your home, your upbringing, your school. Do you have opportunities to connect with people from different backgrounds? But I hope that the show does inspire, people. That's great. If you want to study another language, I have people I've talked to on the phone. They'll say, I wanted to study Spanish or another language, but I don't know, they don't know what to do with it. It's not like medicine, where if you're a medicine, if you're study medicine, you go to med school and you're going to be a doctor. Maybe you don't know which specialty yet, but whatever. So I think language for many people, it can be hard if you're not going to be a language teacher in the formal sense, then it can be harder to try and figure out what to do with this for some people. And I think maybe that's what happened with the woman on the radio was saying it was a useless language, but you have to put on your thinking caps, and to do what you want to do doesn't always just come, and you brainstorm. I do a lot of, just thinking and kind of, I don't daydreaming, but I just try and let myself think creatively, and I just enjoy it. So I think that, yes, I see quite a few people who reach out and say, as a result, and they'll say, I'm black and, I want to study Spanish. I want to get back to Spanish. Or people call me and ask me, I don't know what to do with it, but I know I want to do something with language. And we, talk it through and try and figure out some ideas, brainstorming ideas. And then, just try and be an inspiration and hopefully a positive force for folks as they try and figure out, what can I do with this language, or
what in the world
Yes.
can I do with this language, right?
You got the whole world. Yes, that's the great thing.
That's exactly right.
Yes, you got the whole world.
We got the whole world, indeed.
Yes.
Now, Kim, I'd like you to do one more thing for me today, please.
Sure.
I want you to imagine that listening audience now, and what else is on your heart, your mind, your spirit, that before we finish our conversation today, you do not want to leave them without hearing from you about what?
I think it's, again, a summary, because this is just so important to me. So I think it's just more of a summation of thinking about Latin America in particular, because that's my area. But I think thinking much more broadly and expanding our thoughts about who is Latin American, what does that person look like, and they could look like me, they could look like you, but I think we've left out the people that look like me, and that their history is glorious. I mean, it comes with a lot of heartbreak, obviously, and tragedy, but I say to create such things as samba in Brazil, and be salsa, and building part of Puerto Rico and Old San Juan, Viejo San Juan, and so much of Latin America and the Afro-Mexicans, that there's a tremendous history and accomplishments and resilience. And that for me is most important. And if people can think differently, and so that maybe the next time they open a magazine and see someone who's Brazilian, even if they aren't of African descent, start thinking differently. Like, oh, wait a minute, because in Brazil, actually, 55% of the population is of African descent. So the majority, yes, so the majority are of African descent. And, questioning when you see something, oh, could this have not been, filled this role? Because casting is a choice. Casting, as I say, is a choice, and it's a decision that is made, but other decisions can be made. And so for me, it's this awareness. If I can shed light on awareness, and hopefully, and I'll tell you this, Norah, I remember reading a while ago that there was a little boy in Rio in a favela, and if your audience isn't familiar with the favelas, it's those really kind of humble structures that are built on the hills in Rio. You see them so often. And they are usually people who are black and brown people live in them, because they tend to be, very humble, low to moderate income individuals. But there's a whole history behind it, and it's all built on, unfortunately, racist policy. But my point is, so this little boy, when I was reading this article, he said that before seeing Black Panther, the movie, he said he thought that black people were dirty and he didn't want to be black. That is not uncommon. That, unfortunately, is not uncommon. And after seeing Black Panther, he said, the father said he realized he had superpowers and he felt so much better about being black. That's the power of movies, television, magazines, media, for good as well. And so yes. I hope that our show can have that same kind of impact, especially for young children, that they feel good in the skin that they're in, and they start to learn more about their history and culture, and that they walk with their heads held high and know that they're part of a great legacy. So for me, if I can help with that, I'm feeling really good.
You are definitely helping with that, Kim Haas. Thank you so much. That was powerfully said. Those that are about to put casting calls together, I give them a warning. And
it's a choice.
And I just really, that's right. I really appreciate it. The touching stories that you have shared, and I know you have so many more. Perhaps we have an opportunity to do a storytelling exchange where even more stories are told, so that we can continue to bring this very important meaning of our identity, and just the heartbreak that you just shared from the sense of identity that young child had. But now he has the superpowers that he needs to make a difference in the world. So thank you for that.
Gracias.
Kim, thanks today. I really appreciate your being here, and we all wish you, of course, the very best with your wonderful program and all the other wonderful things that you'll think of with that thinking cap of yours. It's clearly on all the time.
Gracias, Norah. Muchísimas gracias.
Gracias. And hasta pronto, ¿no?
Hasta pronto.
Luego.
Claro que sí.
Thank you so much for listening to this podcast episode today. Please leave a review or share your thoughts on social media or on my website, fluency.consulting. And please remember those forms on my website. Suggest topics and guests, please. You'll also see a form you can use if you'd like me to come talk to your institution organization, or business about language in life, work, education, or play. And thank you again for considering a donation or sponsorship. I appreciate it. I look forward to our next time together.